some really startling news that's come out this week. It looks like the major insurer of all the cars for hire, Uber, Lyft, yellow cabs, green cabs, all of them, is going to go into bankruptcy, liquidation as they call it for insurers, and it's going to create some really huge changes if it happens. I wanted to talk about it, and I found myself here in this nice spot at the end of the South Street Seaport Pier by the bridge overlooking Brooklyn Heights, and it's just such a nice night. But this is a big news for people who live in New York City because you don't really think about what it takes to put cars for hire out on the street. You know, so many of us use e-hail apps or old school using the yellow and green cabs. But we all know that cars cause a great deal of harm. And the way that we deal with that and rationalize it on a policy basis here in New York is by insuring those risks. We have mandatory insurance schemes. So we say, okay, everyone's driving. Driving's going to hurt and kill people, but you have to have insurance, so there will be compensation for the people who get hurt. And as a society, we'd rather have cars and all the hurt and pay out the insurance than, you know, just not have cars. Okay, that's a decision I guess our culture has made. Some of us disagree. But what happens when the insurer goes into bankruptcy or liquidation? Well, you might imagine that there's a marketplace and some other insurer might step up to cover those risks and make sure the compensation is paid to the victims of our motoring. But that's not going to happen in this case. What we've got is American Transit Insurance Company, a specialty insurer that insures over 60% of the cars for hire in New York City. And a repeat customer in my business. I deal with them all the time. You know, they're about to go belly up, according to reports that I've read in the New York Times and Bloomberg News and Gothamist, all different sources coming together and saying this company is about to really go into bankruptcy. And what that means, I think, is that the drivers of these cars for hire are just going to stop driving, and it's going to be abrupt. It's not going to be gradual. It's going to be more than half of the cars for hire disappearing unless, you know, those drivers decide that they want to go out and drive illegally without insurance. I don't think that's going to happen in large numbers, certainly. What that's going to mean is a huge, you know, diminution of traffic on our New York City streets. It's going to mean a real lack of accessibility of cars for hire for those who use them. It's going to mean a huge hit to the bottom lines of companies like Uber and Lyft that are making all this money off of the e-hail system here in New York. And most fundamentally, it's going to raise the question of, is it really worth it to have such private motoring going on, so much private motoring activity going on in New York City, because people are just going to hop in their own cars if they can't get the e-hail, and we may have a traffic nightmare. Or, I don't know, maybe we'll have deserted streets. It will be very interesting to see what happens when and if American Transit goes into liquidation, as so many observers believe they will. As someone who has for well over a decade been litigating against American Transit all the time, you know, I have some insights and opinions on what, you know, why we're in this spot, right? So American Transit is not like any other insurance company. You know, the main auto insurers, yeah, some are better than others. The ones that sell on price, Geico and Progressive, will save you, you know, a few bucks. You know, they save you a few bucks by being difficult and not paying out to victims who deserve the money. There are other insurers that are a little bit more generous, you know, like State Farm, for example. But at the end of the day, American Transit is just a whole order of magnitude worse than all of those other auto insurers, because their way of doing business is to send all these cars for hire out into the world of New York City and then basically not answer the phone or answer their mail when they get claims from people who've been hurt by the drivers. And it's sort of like a laugh line I get when I speak to groups of cyclists, but I have observed there is something akin to a magnetic attraction between cars for hire and bicycles in New York City, because you would not believe what a large portion of the crash victims are coming out of collisions with cars for hire. And American Transit has had this business model of just trying to get the market share. They want the big market share. They want everyone to turn to them so they don't turn drivers down. Driver may have hurt, maimed, killed people. American Transit is still going to give them insurance because they wanted to be the leader in insuring these cars for hire in New York City. And the way that they dealt with all of these claims arising from these mediocre or bad and dangerous drivers is to basically try to ignore the claimants and do everything they could to drag out the process so that most lawyers wouldn't even touch the cases of the crash victims harmed by American Transit drivers. Most, of these victims were just left to their own devices. They didn't get the no-fault insurance that New York is supposed to guarantee them because American Transit won't pay for their medical bills, their lost earnings, and their miscellaneous expenses on a no-fault basis. And they had to wait until their case went to trial in order to have any hope of a meaningful settlement to compensate them for non-economic loss, disability, injuries, pain, suffering, all kinds of other things, lost earnings. So, basically American Transit was just out there waiting until the eve of trial, and they would try cases because the system was that the liability was capped. It was a high cap. It was $100,000 for cars for hire in New York City, but it's not all so high that really that many people saw it through, because after the 100,000, there's no there. So basically, they ran their business based on an assumption that we can cause all of this harm through our drivers who aren't vetted and aren't careful and aren't following traffic rules, and we can basically hide from the liabilities and not pay them out. But now it turns out that they will be. The Times article said that American Transit was paying off its old liabilities with the money it was getting from new people becoming Uber and Lyft drivers and paying them cash up front to get a policy. It was like a pyramid scheme, right? So, it's like it's the end of the line. There's no money left. I have clients who've been waiting for years because American Transit delays litigation. I have an American Transit driver who didn't show up to give testimony in a case on behalf of my client 6 times. I had to move the court 3 separate times for an order compelling that driver to show up and give testimony so that I could establish my client's right to compensation. And the court gave them 6 times to not show up until finally they said, okay, that's your last chance. You're not allowed to testify anymore. So my client's story, which was true, by the way, of course I'd say that, I'm their lawyer, but it was. My client's story prevails, and the lies that the American Transit insured driver told to the cop at the scene don't get told, because that driver didn't show up for their deposition, for their testimony. But it just shows you that delay, not answering the phone, not answering the mail, not answering the door, this is a company that's been functioning on that basis for decades, I suppose. I haven't been doing it that long. And now they've run out of money, is what the Times and Bloomberg and everyone else is saying about them. And what that means is that there just won't be insurance for these cars for hire in New York. And I think it's going to mean a shortage of those cars. It's going to mean a surplus of people driving themselves around. And I think ultimately, I hope it's going to lead to a rethinking of, do we really need so many cars on the street? And are we really comfortable with a system that caused so much carnage, and just saying, well, it's okay, it's insured. There isn't any insurer that will touch this risk. There were reports about American Transit trying to sell its business to other insurers, the bit players in the field of insuring cars for hire. Those insurers didn't want any of it. They said, we wouldn't insure those American Transit drivers. They're bad drivers. That's why American Transit is ending up in bankruptcy, it appears. So what's going to happen? Are we going to pay drivers more and train them better and get better and safer drivers so it doesn't cost as much to insure them? Are we going to have less cars for hire? I don't know. Insatiable appetite, it seems to me, here in New York City for cars for hire and the trips they provide. It's a very interesting question, and I'll be looking to see what happens. But it's a shame for the victims who've been waiting all these years that the only promise of justice that the system gives them is that, oh, American Transit Insurance Company will pay out up to $100,000 if you lost an arm or something like that. And they may not even get that, or maybe they'll get it after a year or two in the liquidation process.